Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey deep into the forgotten corners of Saskatchewan, a land of isolated small towns, endless prairie wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying small-town horror stories ever shared. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Saskatchewan, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Liam Porter, and this happened when my younger brother Noah disappeared in a Saskatchewan town that barely showed up on maps. We grew up there, left for college, and returned years later after our mother died, just to sell the old house and move on. That was the plan. The town was called Ridgeway. Population under 600. 1 grocery store, 1 school, 1 long main road that ended in fields so wide they made you feel small just standing there. People smiled when they saw us, but their eyes lingered too long on Noah, like they were trying to place him. On our second night back, Noah told me something felt wrong. Not dangerous, unfinished. He said the town felt like it was missing something important, and that missing thing was getting restless. I laughed it off, blaming grief and exhaustion. The next morning, Noah was gone. His bed untouched, his phone left behind. When I asked the neighbors if they'd seen him, they all gave me the same confused look. They asked me the same question. Who's Noah? At first, I thought it was some kind of cruel joke. Grief does strange things to people, and small towns thrive on rumors. But as I went door to door, my confusion turned into panic. No one remembered Noah, not the clerk who sold him coffee the night before, not the old teacher who taught us both, not even the woman who lived next door for 20 years. Worse, physical proof began to vanish. His name faded from old mail. Photos on my phone glitched, his face smearing into static before disappearing entirely. Our childhood pictures showed only me, standing alone in places I knew he'd been. When I went to the police station, the officer patiently explained that I was an only child. He pulled up records, birth certificates, school enrollment forms, all showing just one Porter brother, me. I drove back to our old house shaking. Noah's room was still there, but empty, not cleaned out, not disturbed, just unused, like it had never belonged to anyone. That night, I heard footsteps outside the door of that empty room. Slow, careful, as if something was learning how to walk like him. The next morning, I tried to leave Ridgeway. I told myself I needed distance, clarity, anything that wasn't this town pretending my brother never existed. But the highway out curved back into itself after 20 minutes, dumping me right back at the same faded welcome sign. I tried again and again. Each road led me back, like the town had folded inward around me. I stopped at the diner to calm down. The waitress called me by name without asking, set down 2 mugs of coffee, then frowned at the second one like she couldn't remember why it was there. She apologized and took it away, her hands shaking. As I sat there, I noticed something disturbing. In conversations around me, people kept pausing mid-sentence, correcting themselves as if removing words that no longer fit. Names vanished, pronouns shortened, stories became vague. The town wasn't just forgetting Noah, it was practicing. That afternoon, I found a notebook hidden in our basement. Noah's handwriting filled the pages. The last line stopped me cold. If you're reading this, it's already learning how to erase you too. I started testing the town. I wrote Noah's name on scraps of paper and taped them to walls, doors, street signs. Within hours, the ink faded like it had been left in sunlight for years. When I carved his name into wood behind the house, the grooves closed overnight, leaving smooth grain behind. At sunset, the town grew quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No dogs barking, no wind, no insects. It was as if sound itself had been edited out. That's when I saw him. Noah stood at the edge of the field behind our house, half hidden by tall grass. He looked thinner, unfinished. When I called his name, he didn't respond. Instead, he pointed toward the town and then shook his head slowly. Behind him, the field rippled like water disturbed by something moving just beneath the surface. Shapes shifted, briefly forming familiar faces before dissolving again. I understood then what Ridgeway really was. Not a town, but a filter. It removed people quietly, cleanly, and reused what was left. And it had already decided Noah was unnecessary. I followed Noah into the field that night, even though every instinct told me not to. The grass swallowed my legs as I walked, and the air felt thick, like breathing through damp cloth. Noah moved ahead of me without making a sound, his outline flickering in and out like a bad signal. He finally spoke when we reached a shallow depression in the ground. His voice sounded wrong, flattened, stripped of emotion. He told me the town kept a balance. It forgot people to keep itself stable. Those who noticed the forgetting were marked as excess. Noah said he'd tried to leave weeks ago. Each time the town took something from him, his memories, his reflection, his weight in the world. "I'm almost gone," he said, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. I asked why the town chose him. He shook his head. "It didn't," he said. "It chose you. I just noticed first." That's when the ground behind us opened its eyes. The field wasn't empty. It was layered. Beneath the soil, something massive shifted, breathing slow and steady like the town itself had a pulse. Faces pressed briefly against the ground, stretching the earth before sinking back down. I recognized some of them. People from town, people I'd spoken to that week. Noah told me the truth then. The town didn't kill people. It absorbed them. Their names, memories, and edges dissolved until only function remained. Shopkeepers, teachers, neighbors, empty shells doing their part, unaware of what they'd lost. The thing beneath the field began pulling at Noah, drawing him downward inch by inch. I grabbed his arm, but my hand slipped through like smoke. He looked relieved. "At least it's done with me," he said. Before he disappeared completely, Noah leaned close and whispered, "It needs a witness, someone to remember. That's the trap." The ground closed, the field stilled, and the town lights flickered back on, as if nothing had ever happened. After that night, Ridgeway treated me differently. People still smiled, still spoke, but their eyes slid off me like I wasn't fully there. Conversations cut short when I approached. Doors closed a second too early. It felt like the town was deciding how much of me it could erase without causing problems. I noticed gaps forming in my own memory. Small things at first. Addresses, faces, details of my childhood that should have been permanent. When I tried to write Noah's name, my hand cramped violently, refusing to finish the letters. The town council called me in for a check-in. 5 people sat behind a table, all speaking in rehearsed, calm tones. They suggested grief counseling, a temporary stay. No one said Noah's name, but I could feel it pressing against their silence. As I left, one of them slipped me a folded note. It contained a single sentence written in shaky ink. "Leave before you become useful." That night, the town's siren wailed for the first time since my childhood. No emergency announced, no explanation given. Just a long, steady warning meant only for me. I ran, not not toward the highway, but through back roads, fields, anywhere the town's neat lines began to blur. The siren followed me, bending in pitch as if adjusting to my pace. My thoughts felt loose, unraveling with every step. I reached the edge of town just before dawn. The welcome sign was gone, replaced by a blank wooden post. Behind me, Ridgeway looked smaller, flatter, like a cardboard cutout pretending to be a place. That's when I felt it pull. Not my body, my name, my history. I dropped to my knees, screaming my brother's name out loud, forcing it into the air again and again. Each time I said it, something recoiled, the ground trembled, the siren died, and suddenly, I was outside. When I looked back, the town was still there, peaceful and complete. But it felt lighter, hungrier. I escaped because I remembered. And as long as I keep telling this story, it can't fully finish erasing either of us. Weeks passed, but Ridgeway never left my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the field swallowing Noah, the town reshaping itself like clay, and those hollow faces pressing against the soil. I began noticing small signs in my new city. Streets that bent oddly, strangers whose expressions flickered like static, mirrors that lagged just a fraction behind my movements. I tried telling people about the town, about Noah, about what had almost erased me, but my words felt empty. Notes I left vanished, emails I sent never arrived. Even my own memories began blurring. Ridgeway didn't just erase, it filtered, refining reality until nothing contradicted its version of truth. The notebook I found in the basement started appearing again wherever I went. Its pages filled themselves with warnings I didn't remember writing, in handwriting that wasn't entirely mine. One line chilled me to the bone. Witnesses last longer, but only until they forget. I realized then the town didn't want bodies. It wanted continuity. It wanted its story to remain perfect, and everyone else expendable. The final warning came one night in a dream. I stood at the edge of Ridgeway once more. But this time I wasn't alone. Shadows whispered my name from every building, every tree, every hollow in the prairie. Noah's face appeared beside mine, hollowed, almost gone, urging me to leave before the town decided I had outlived my usefulness. I awoke drenched in sweat, realizing the truth. Ridgeway had never been just a town. It was a predator. It took people quietly, shaping reality to erase them, and leaving only the narrative it desired. My survival wasn't mercy. It was temporary. Since then, I've moved constantly, never settling, never letting my name stay in one place too long. Every time I hear of small towns with long, empty streets or abandoned fields, I check the maps. And sometimes, when I think I'm safe, I glimpse a familiar sign in the distance, just at the horizon. Ridgeway is patient. It waits. And one day, it will remember me again. My name is Rachel Dunbar, and this happened when I was working my first summer on my uncle's farm in rural Saskatchewan. I was 19, desperate for money, and eager to prove myself capable of handling the endless fields and creaking barns that had been in our family for generations. The farm sat isolated at the edge of town, surrounded by miles of flat, endless prairie. On hot days, the horizon seemed to melt, and at night, the wind whispered through the crops like it was carrying secrets. My uncle, George, warned me about storms, about machinery, about coyotes, but never about what had happened to the last summer farmhand, Tommy, who vanished without a trace 2 years prior. At first, I thought the stories were exaggeration. Small towns love to gossip. But the moment I arrived, I noticed things that didn't make sense. Tools left in the exact same spot for days, doors that were unlocked but never open, shadows that seemed to twitch at the edge of my vision. I brushed it off, determined to get the work done. But by the third night, I realized the farm had noticed me too. The first sign came when I heard footsteps in the barn at night. Heavy, slow, deliberate, but with no one inside. I grabbed a lantern and searched every corner. Haylofts, stalls, storage rooms. Nothing. The shadows seemed to retreat just beyond the light. Then I noticed the marks on the walls. Scratches. Small at first, almost like claws. But they spelled something. Names, dates, and numbers that didn't make sense. One read, Tommy, July 3rd, 2022. Another had my initials, smudged and partially erased. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw figures standing in the cornfields, watching. Some nights, the wind carried voices, low murmurs repeating my name. I tried to tell my uncle, but he dismissed it, muttering about imagination and summer heat. I realized then that the farm wasn't just old. It was aware, and it remembered those who had vanished before me. That night, the barn door closed behind me without a sound, leaving me trapped in the dark, and I knew the work would not wait for daylight. By the third night, the farm's attention on me had grown sharper. Every time I stepped outside, the wind shifted in unnatural ways, carrying whispers that seemed to come from the barn itself. I would hear my own name, stretched and warped, like the farm was learning how to speak me. I tried to ignore it, but small things began to happen during the day too. Tools moved when I wasn't looking. Footprints appeared in the dirt where no one had walked. Even the livestock acted strangely. Cows staring for hours with unblinking eyes, chickens huddled in corners, refusing to move. One evening, I found an old photograph tucked under a loose floorboard in the barn. It showed Tommy and 3 other farmhands, all smiling in the sun. But their shadows didn't match their bodies. The shadows were elongated, twisted, and darker than the daylight should allow. I showed it to my uncle, hoping he would admit the truth about Tommy. He didn't. He just shook his head, eyes distant, and muttered, "The farm has its own memory. Some don't leave, even when they should." The next morning, I tried to leave. But the farm made sure I couldn't. Every gate I opened seemed to loop me back. The field stretched endlessly, flattening the horizon. Even the main road disappeared into rows of corn taller than I remembered. By mid-afternoon, the wind whispered again, this time clearer. "Stay, stay, stay," it repeated, almost teasing. I realized the farm wasn't just a place, it was alive, observing me, testing me, learning me. As I worked the fields, I began noticing glimpses of movement at the edge of my vision. Shadows moving with a delay, shapes vanishing the instant I turned to see them. They weren't just watching, they were rehearsing. I felt it in my chest, a tightening, as if the soil itself were pressing against me, reminding me that this place kept secrets in layers no one should uncover. That night, the barn door creaked open on its own. Inside, the shadows had gathered closer to the lantern light, moving in strange, coordinated patterns. And I understood. I wasn't just a worker here. I was the next lesson. By midnight, I had stopped trying to fight the farm. I stayed inside the barn, sitting on a bale of hay, lantern in hand, watching shadows crawl along the walls. The air grew thick, almost wet, like it was pressing against my skin. Every creak of the beams, every shift of the lantern flame felt deliberate, like the farm was testing my reactions. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps in the loft above me. Slow, cautious, deliberate, just like Tommy's had been, according to the stories. I called out. Nothing. The air responded instead, carrying a low hum that vibrated through my chest, almost musical, almost alive. I climbed the ladder to the loft, trembling. The hayloft was empty, except for scratches carved deep into the beams. They spelled a single word repeatedly. Remember. I understood then. The farm didn't need to harm me to keep me. It needed me to witness, to acknowledge its memory, to imprint it with my fear. And the more I felt it, the stronger it became. The farm wasn't satisfied with just watching me. That night, I felt it reach into my dreams. I dreamed of Tommy, thin and pale, standing in the middle of the cornfield, whispering my name. Each time I opened my eyes in the dream, I was back in the barn. But something had changed. Stray strands of hay moved on their own, and my shadow stretched unnaturally, mimicking movements I hadn't made. When I woke, the barn smelled different. Earthy, wet, and metallic. I found muddy footprints leading from the back door to the loft ladder. I had checked every inch of the barn before bed, yet here they were. I followed them outside. The prairie was silent. The wind had died completely. Then I saw shapes in the distance. Tall, thin, swaying like stalks of corn, but darker, moving independently of the wind. They formed a semicircle around the barn, facing me. I understood. The farm kept its own records, and I was now part of them. I spent the next day in a daze, doing my chores mechanically, but I felt the farm pressing closer with every step. Even the animals seemed to behave strangely, moving in patterns I had never seen before, forming concentric circles in the fields, staring at me like they were taking attendance. I could feel the land itself watching, measuring, deciding what to keep and what to erase. By afternoon, I realized the shadows weren't just around the barn. They were inside me. Mirrors reflected movements I hadn't made. My reflection lingered a fraction too long, twisting slightly when I wasn't looking directly. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, imagination, stress. But deep down, I knew better. That evening, I went into the cornfield to collect hay. The stalks swayed unnaturally, and I glimpsed figures among them. Tall, thin, faceless shapes that mimicked human form, but moved in impossible angles. One of them stepped closer, and I felt a cold, unspoken warning. The farm wasn't waiting for me to leave. It was waiting for me to belong. That night, the barn door slammed shut on its own, and the lantern I carried swung violently. Shadows stretched along the walls like ink, thickening and twisting as if the structure itself was alive. I tried to leave, but every exit felt blocked. The cornfield outside had grown denser, taller than before, surrounding the barn in a suffocating wall of stalks. I screamed, pounding the doors and windows, but the farm ignored me. Then I saw it. Tommy, or what remained of him. His face was pale, stretched, partially translucent, and he mimicked my movements exactly, as if practicing my gestures for some unseen purpose. I understood finally. The farm didn't just trap people physically. It trapped them in essence. Their forms, their memories, their identity, all recorded and rehearsed for the land itself. I fled into the shadows of the corn, and the farm followed silently, observing, rehearsing, waiting. I had survived, but only barely. And it had already begun learning me. In the days after, I stayed mostly inside the farmhouse, avoiding the fields and barn. But the farm's presence never let me rest. Tools moved when I wasn't looking, and shadows flickered along walls in ways I could feel more than see. Even my reflection refused to stay consistent. Sometimes my hair was longer, sometimes my eyes shifted in a strange, unnatural way. One night, I heard whispers outside my window. They weren't human voices, not exactly. They were echoes of the past, carrying the laughter and sighs of previous farmhands. Tommy's voice joined the chorus, repeating my name with a hollow insistence that made my chest tighten. I tried to leave the farm completely, driving hours away, but each route seemed to fold the land back on itself. Every highway, every side road, brought me back to the same farmhouse. The farm didn't just trap bodies. It twisted reality to keep its story intact, looping anyone who tried to escape. I realized the terrifying truth. I was not allowed to leave. Not until the farm had finished rehearsing me completely. The final night came silently. I wandered the farmhouse, feeling every floorboard groan under weight I wasn't sure was mine. Shadows gathered thicker in corners, pooling unnaturally, and the air grew dense and wet. Then I heard it. Footsteps from the barn, slow, deliberate, echoing through the walls of the house itself. I stepped outside, lantern in hand, and the cornfield spread endlessly before me, shadows swaying like living things. Tommy emerged from the stalks, translucent and stretched, his face hollow, whispering, "Welcome. You belong." I ran, but the land shifted beneath me, elongating paths and flattening hills until I felt trapped inside a living map, designed only to guide me back. I understood fully. The farm didn't need to harm me. It only needed to record, to absorb, and eventually to erase. Now, years later, I still feel its presence whenever I hear wind through wheat or corn. It remembers, it observes, and it waits for the next worker foolish enough to step into its fields. My name is Evan Marks, and this happened during a summer I spent working as a temporary lighthouse keeper in a small, isolated coastal town in Saskatchewan. Though technically, the lighthouse was on a massive inland lake that felt more like the ocean, I was eager for solitude and adventure, thinking it would be a quiet, peaceful job. The lighthouse stood at the edge of the water, tall and weathered, surrounded by rocky cliffs and endless fog that rolled in and out like it had a mind of its own. The town below was tiny, only a few dozen residents, and almost everyone avoided the cliffs after sunset. The stories they whispered were enough to make newcomers uneasy. Disappearances, strange lights over the water, and a previous keeper who vanished one stormy night without a trace. The first evening, I climbed the spiral staircase to the top, taking in the view. That's when I noticed something strange. The beam of the lighthouse didn't just cut through the fog, it seemed to create it, shaping the mist in ways that felt deliberate, almost alive. The first night in the lighthouse was quiet. Too quiet. I walked the spiral stairs repeatedly, checking equipment, but the silence was unnatural. Then I heard a faint tapping from below. Soft, rhythmic, almost like someone walking on the cliff rocks beneath the lighthouse. I called out, but only my own voice echoed back. By morning, the locals were whispering. They didn't meet my eyes when I asked about the previous keeper. They only said, "Keep the light going and don't watch the water too closely." Confused and unnerved, I tried to ignore their warnings, attributing them to small-town superstition. That night, the tapping returned, louder this time. I looked out toward the water and saw shapes moving just under the surface. Shadowy forms gliding beneath the reflection of the lighthouse beam. The shapes weren't fish, nor were they human. I couldn't explain them, and the more I stared, the more I felt watched, as if the water itself had eyes. It became clear. The lighthouse wasn't just guiding ships. It was keeping something contained, or perhaps inviting it. By the third night, I started noticing changes in the lighthouse itself. The beam, which had always rotated mechanically, began pausing unexpectedly, freezing in one position for long stretches of time. During those moments, the fog around the cliffs thickened unnaturally, forming shapes that were vaguely human but impossible to identify. I tried calling the Coast Guard on the radio, but the line only emitted static, punctuated by faint whispers echoing from the water. I began exploring the lower floors of the lighthouse more carefully and found an old journal hidden in a trapdoor beneath the stairs. It belonged to the previous keeper, and the entries became progressively erratic, filled with descriptions of shapes in the water and voices in the wind. The final entry chilled me. They wait under the light. If I stare too long, they will pull me in. The fog remembers. That night, I climbed to the top again and watched the water. The shapes moved closer, circling the base of the cliffs like predators, as if they had learned the rhythm of the light and were preparing for something. The fourth night brought an almost tangible sense of dread. I could hear the wind, carrying voices now, speaking my name, urging me to look deeper into the water. When I did, I noticed something terrifying. The fog wasn't just floating. It was forming arms and hands, reaching toward the lighthouse foundation, moving with intent. I tried to leave the top observation deck, but the stairs seemed endless, stretching as if the lighthouse itself had warped. Every step echoed unnaturally, mixing with whispers from the water. I could feel the shapes beneath, tugging at the edges of my vision, testing my focus, teasing my sanity. Back on solid ground, I finally confronted a local fisherman who had lingered at the docks. His face was pale, lined with fear, and he whispered urgently, "Don't let the light shine too long. The water remembers every soul that's ever watched it, and it's hungry for the next." I realized then that this lighthouse was not a beacon of safety. It was a trap, and the previous keeper had vanished because he had looked too long. By midnight, I could no longer ignore the water. I climbed to the top of the lighthouse again, holding the lantern tight, and watched as the fog thickened into grotesque forms. Faces appeared briefly, pale and expressionless, pressed against the mist as if trying to see me, and then vanished. Their mouths moved, but no sound reached me, just a sense of hunger, of calculation. I noticed the beam of the lighthouse sweeping too slowly over the cliffs. It felt deliberate, like the light itself was guiding something. The journal I had found earlier warned that staring too long allowed the water to learn your reflection. I realized with horror that every time I looked, the fog remembered me, memorized my movements, and rehearsed them. Suddenly, the wind shifted violently, and I saw it. A humanoid figure rising from the water, wet, tall, and impossibly thin. It moved with uncanny grace, circling the base of the cliffs, staring directly at me. My heart pounded. I wasn't just being watched. I was being chosen. I tried to descend the lighthouse, but the staircase seemed impossibly long, twisting in ways that defied geometry. The whispers in the wind grew louder, repeating my name with insistence, urging me to look over the cliffs. I gripped the railing, feeling it vibrate as though alive, pulsing with some unnatural energy. When I reached the ground floor, the fog had encroached further, creeping up the cliffs toward the lighthouse walls. The figure from the water now stood at the edge, motionless, its eyes dark, empty voids, locked on mine. I wanted to flee, but my legs refused to obey. I remembered the journal's warning. The water remembers. It is patient. Panic clawed at me as the figure began moving closer, gliding effortlessly over the wet rocks. I could hear the faintest splash with each step, though the water seemed still. The lighthouse was no longer a building, it was a sentinel, and I was its prey. Escape was no longer a choice. The next night, I resolved to face the water directly. I carried the lantern down the cliffs and stood at the edge, staring into the dark, rippling lake. The fog moved unnaturally, wrapping around the rocks and curling toward me. Shapes formed within it. Tall, thin, faceless figures that mimicked human motion, but with a fluid, inhuman grace. Then I saw the previous keeper, or what remained of him. His body was thin, translucent, almost melting into the mist, and he raised a hand toward me, silently warning me. The water seemed to pulse with awareness, as if it were alive, studying my every movement, learning my fears. I felt the weight of centuries pressing through the fog. Every ship the lighthouse had guided, every person who had disappeared under its beam. They were all recorded here, trapped in the water and fog, rehearsing endlessly. I realized the truth. The lighthouse didn't just guide ships. It collected souls, storing them in the mist, feeding on their fear and memory. And now, I was part of that ledger. I tried to retreat, but the fog moved faster than I could run, curling around my legs and tugging at my clothes. It whispered in my ears, repeating my name, pressing against my thoughts. Every step I took toward the lighthouse felt like I was being guided back toward the water, as if invisible hands were steering me into the mist. Inside the lighthouse, the beam spun erratically, pausing on certain parts of the water where shapes writhed beneath the surface. I realized they were practicing, learning, imitating the patterns of the beam, waiting for the moment it would shine long enough to claim me entirely. I clutched the journal tightly. It had warned that looking too long would let the water memorize you completely. I forced myself to look away, to focus on the lantern. But I could still feel the shapes studying me, cataloging me, rehearsing my fear. By dawn, the fog receded slightly, but the knowledge remained. The lighthouse was patient, and I was trapped in its silent, meticulous record. The nights grew longer, the fog thicker. Every sound, the creak of the lighthouse beam, the whisper of waves against the cliffs, felt amplified, as though the world itself were holding its breath. I began noticing reflections in the water that weren't mine. Fleeting glimpses of faces from the past keepers, each one frozen mid-motion, watching, waiting. One night, I saw a shadow detach from the fog and move toward the lighthouse. It glided effortlessly over the rocks, its form humanoid but distorted, impossibly thin, and its eyes were voids of darkness. I froze as it circled the base, studying me like an experiment, memorizing every flicker of fear in my expression. The journal's warnings came alive in my mind. They remember. They record. They wait until you look too long, until you belong to them. I realized that the water wasn't just holding memories. It was practicing, rehearsing, preparing the next victim to vanish silently into the mist. By that moment, I knew my nights of vigilance were no longer enough. I was already part of the record. The final night came with a storm, wind lashing against the lighthouse walls, rain driving down like needles. I climbed to the top and kept my eyes off the water, focusing on the lantern and the beam. But even then, I felt their presence pressing against the glass, the fog wrapping around the structure like living hands. Then I heard the faintest splash, followed by a slow, deliberate climb of the shadowy figure along the cliffs. It stopped at the edge, staring upward. Its faceless form seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the beam, memorizing every movement I made. I understood finally. Escape was impossible. The lighthouse didn't take by force. It waited, patient, meticulous, collecting the essence of those who dared to watch too long. The water and fog were not just containment. They were archives of fear, memory, and identity. I left the lantern on, climbed down, and let the storm carry my voice into the mist. Somewhere beneath the fog, it listened. And I knew one day I would return to the record. My name is Lucas Harrington, and this happened when I was 21 and exploring abandoned places for my photography blog. One evening, I discovered an old, crumbling asylum on the outskirts of a small Saskatchewan town, hidden among overgrown weeds and rusting fences. Locals called it Glenmore Asylum, but no one had lived there or worked there for decades. Rumors of unethical experiments and unexplained patient disappearances clung to the crumbling walls like mold. As I stepped through the rusted gates, the air grew heavier, thick with decay and a metallic tang. The building was massive, with multiple wings stretching into darkness. Broken windows stared like empty eyes, and graffiti from recent trespassers seemed insignificant against the overwhelming silence. I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. By the first floor, I discovered records scattered across the hallway. Patient files yellowed and torn, documenting strange treatments, mysterious illnesses, and sudden vanishings. Some names had dates scrawled repeatedly, almost like someone was tracking time obsessively. I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. As I moved deeper into the asylum, the silence became oppressive. Every footstep echoed unnaturally down the empty hallways, bouncing off cracked walls and peeling paint. I passed rooms filled with overturned wheelchairs, broken beds, and faint stains that suggested more than just age had left its mark. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate shuffling from one of the wings. I froze. My heart pounded. The asylum was supposed to be empty, but the sound of movement, slow and measured, suggested otherwise. I called out, but only a faint, unintelligible whisper responded. I followed the noise to a stairwell leading to the basement. A musty, wet smell rose as I descended, and the darkness seemed thicker there, almost tangible. The shadows moved independently of the flickering flashlight I carried, shifting in ways that made me question my own senses. By the time I reached the basement, I knew I wasn't alone. Something, or someone, had been waiting, rehearsing my arrival, just as it had done for decades with others who dared to enter. In the basement, the air grew heavier with each step. My flashlight flickered as if resisting the darkness, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I noticed marks etched into the concrete, names scratched hurriedly, letters overlapping, almost as if the walls themselves had recorded the countless souls who had vanished here. Then I heard it again, a dragging sound, like chains being pulled across the floor. It came from a room at the far end of the corridor. My instincts screamed to run, but curiosity rooted me in place. I approached cautiously, each step echoing louder than the last. Inside the room, remnants of old medical equipment lay scattered, rusted, and broken. Yet what caught my eye was a chair in the center, straps dangling as though recently used. A faint, cold whisper seemed to come from it. My name. My breath caught, and I realized I was not the first to hear it, nor would I be the last. I backed away, feeling the weight of decades of fear pressing in from every corner of the basement. The deeper I explored, the more the asylum seemed alive. Whispering voices echoed through the halls, overlapping and layering, some pleading, some mocking. I stumbled upon a locked door with scratches all around the frame, as though something inside had been clawing to get out, or someone had been trapped within. Curiosity overpowered fear. I forced the door open and found a small, pitch-black room, the walls damp and covered in mold. As I shined my flashlight inside, I glimpsed shapes that moved independently of any natural logic. Thin, elongated shadows that bent and stretched impossibly, vanishing whenever I tried to focus. I realized then that the asylum was not abandoned. It had merely been waiting, rehearsing the movements and fears of every person who dared enter. And now, it was rehearsing me. My heart pounded as a cold wind swept through the hallway, carrying voices that whispered, "Do you belong here? Or will you join us?" I understood then that some doors, once opened, never truly close. By the fifth night, I felt the asylum pressing closer, almost breathing around me. Every hallway I explored seemed longer, darker, and more twisted than before. Doors I had passed earlier now appeared in different places, and stairwells led to floors I hadn't seen before. It was as if the building itself was rearranging itself, guiding me deeper into its heart. I reached a wing filled with patient rooms, each door slightly ajar. Inside, I glimpsed remnants of past lives. Tattered clothing, broken toys, journals left open, their pages filled with frantic handwriting. The air was thick with the metallic tang of old blood, decay, and something far older I couldn't name. A sudden noise made me freeze, a soft hum, low and rhythmic, coming from the far end of the corridor. The shadows moved with it, stretching across walls like liquid darkness, forming vague human shapes that shivered and shuddered as if performing an unseen ritual. I realized then that the asylum wasn't abandoned. It was rehearsing its horrors for anyone who dared enter. I moved cautiously down the corridor, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The shadows shifted with me, dancing in ways my mind struggled to comprehend. Whispers grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony that seemed to seep into my very thoughts, repeating my name, questioning my presence. "Are you ready? Are you ready?" In the far room, I found a patient record pinned to the wall, decades old. The final entries were scratched through violently, but a few words remained. They wait. They remember. They take the next one. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the asylum had been feeding on the fears of anyone who dared trespass, using memory and panic as a form of sustenance. Then I saw movement in the darkness. Figures emerging from walls and floors, thin, elongated, faceless, their motions jerky yet deliberate. They were practicing, performing the actions of previous visitors, and now rehearsing me. My heart raced. There was no escape. By the seventh night, I realized the asylum had no intention of letting me leave. The walls seemed to pulse and breathe, shadows moving independently of any light source. Every room I entered appeared warped. Furniture where it shouldn't be, staircases leading nowhere, doors opening into black voids that swallowed sound. As I explored a long hallway, I glimpsed a figure in the distance. It was human in shape but distorted, faceless, stretching unnaturally toward the ceiling. The whispers grew louder, now forming coherent words. "Join us. Forever. Remember forever." My breath quickened, my pulse hammering in my ears. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. I backed into a room lined with old hospital beds. Figures from the shadows emerged slowly, moving like actors on an endless stage. Each one mimicked gestures I had made earlier in the asylum, rehearsing, cataloging my presence. I understood. The asylum didn't just terrify. It recorded, memorized, and replayed the terror of its victims. The realization hit me like ice. I was no longer a visitor. I had become part of the performance. I stumbled further into the asylum, desperate to find an exit. but every door I opened led me deeper inside. The building itself seemed alive, walls pulsating, floors creaking as though breathing beneath my feet. Whispered words followed me. "They are waiting. Your fear is theirs." In the central atrium, a faint light revealed dozens of shadowy figures, all faceless, moving silently, circling, practicing gestures I had made in moments of panic. The journal I had discovered earlier suddenly made sense. The asylum was a living archive of fear. Each visitor etched into its memory, each scream replayed in subtle, torturous echoes. I tried to escape through a side exit, only to find it blocked by shadows that weren't there before. They writhed and pulsed with malevolent intent, waiting for me to falter, to become part of their endless rehearsal. I realized the asylum's horrors were not random. They were patient, deliberate, and eternal. I had entered as an observer. Now I was part of its memory, and it would never forget me. By the 9th night, the asylum's grip on me was complete. Every step I took echoed with shadows mimicking my movements, whispering my thoughts aloud. I wandered into a wing I hadn't seen before, saw corridors lined with patient rooms, each door slightly ajar, each room frozen in time. Old belongings littered the floors, cracked dolls, faded photographs, rusted medical tools. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, as though the building itself were alive and aware of my every motion. Then I saw them. Dozens of faceless figures standing silently at the end of the hallway. They moved with unnatural precision, rehearsing every panic-stricken gesture I had made during my exploration. One figure stepped forward, elongated limbs stretching impossibly, and gestured toward me, silently commanding my attention. I understood fully. The asylum was no longer just a building. It was a predator, patient and meticulous, feeding on fear, memorizing each visitor, adding me to its eternal archive. Escape was no longer an option. I was now a permanent part of its collection. The final night was relentless. The asylum seemed to pulse with life, walls creaking, floors vibrating as though with heartbeat. Shadows shifted independently of any light, merging and separating in grotesque choreography. I tried to run, but the corridors twisted impossibly, doors leading nowhere, staircases looping back to where I had started. In the main atrium, all the shadowy figures gathered, circling silently. Their motions were rehearsed, deliberate, cataloging my fear, my exhaustion, my terror. I realized then that the asylum didn't kill, it archived. Every scream, every frantic movement, every stolen glance was etched into its memory, replayed endlessly for the next soul to witness. I dropped to my knees, clutching the journal like a talisman. But the figures began to approach, faceless and patient. I was no longer the observer. I had become part of its performance, another ghostly actor in its eternal, horrifying rehearsal. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, feel the cold air, and know the asylum never forgets. My name is Mia Callahan, and this happened the summer after my college graduation. I had been invited by friends to a remote cabin deep in the Saskatchewan woods, a place locals called Dead Pines because of the long stretches of trees that had died mysteriously decades ago. The cabin was small, isolated, and surrounded by dense forest, where sunlight barely touched the ground. I expected a peaceful retreat. The first night, the forest felt alive in a way that made me uneasy. The wind whispered through the bare pine needles, carrying sounds that resembled voices but faded as soon as I tried to focus. My friends laughed it off, but I felt watched. Every shadow beyond the cabin windows seemed to shift unnaturally, stretching and bending as if observing me. By the second night, I noticed the pines themselves appeared to move subtly when no wind blew. Something about the forest was deliberate, patient, and intelligent, and I felt a growing dread that this cabin was not a safe haven, but a trap. The second night, strange things began to happen. Doors that I was certain I had locked swung open slowly on their own. Footsteps echoed from the attic above, though no one had been up there. I told myself it was the wind, but my gut screamed otherwise. I stepped outside to investigate and saw faint glowing eyes staring at me from the tree line. When I approached, they vanished, leaving the forest eerily silent. The air felt thick, heavy with an unseen presence, as if the dead pines themselves were alive, shifting slightly, watching me from every angle. Back inside, I found scratches along the cabin walls, fresh, deliberate like claws marking a territory. My friends dismissed them as branches scraping, but their unease mirrored my own. I realized that the deeper we went into the forest, the more the trees seemed to stretch, bending subtly to observe, to anticipate our movements. That night, I didn't sleep. I felt the forest waiting, patient and hungry. By the third night, the forest seemed almost alive. Every sound, branches cracking, leaves rustling, distant animal calls, was exaggerated, deliberate, and seemed to echo unnaturally. I started noticing patterns. Shadows among the trees moving in ways the wind couldn't explain. Shapes that paused whenever I tried to focus, vanishing as soon as I blinked. Inside the cabin, we heard whispers, low and guttural, coming from the corners of rooms where no one stood. My friends tried to joke about it, but I could see their unease, the tight grip on the edges of chairs, the way their eyes flicked to every shadow. The air smelled of damp earth and something acrid, a hint of decay that hadn't been there before. I ventured outside briefly and felt the weight of unseen eyes tracking my movements. The dead pines seemed to lean closer, stretching toward me. It was deliberate, patient, waiting. The forest was not just a backdrop. It was the predator, and we were intruding into its domain. The fourth night, things escalated. One of my friends, Ethan, swore he saw figures moving between the trees, thin and humanoid, but impossibly long-limbed, crouching in the underbrush, watching us silently. When I went to look, they vanished instantly, leaving no footprints or disturbance on the forest floor. Inside the cabin, strange scratches began appearing along the walls overnight, deeper and more deliberate than before. My flashlight flickered violently, as if reacting to the presence. The whispers became voices, repeating our names, counting, measuring, and mocking our attempts to understand. I tried to leave, but the paths we had walked earlier now seemed unfamiliar, as if the forest itself had shifted, closing off the way back. Panic set in as I realized the cabin wasn't merely surrounded by trees. It was encased in them, trapped in a labyrinth that grew more twisted with every step. The forest was patient, and it had chosen us to remain within its grasp. By the fifth night, fear had become almost tangible, a living presence pressing down on me. Every tree seemed to have a purpose, leaning slightly, twisting, almost breathing in the darkness. I realized that the dead pines weren't just trees. They were sentinels, observing, recording, waiting. That evening, while trying to photograph the cabin from the forest edge, I noticed shapes moving just beyond my vision. Tall, thin, humanoid forms, faceless and gliding across the ground with unnatural silence. When I turned to focus, they disappeared, leaving only the sound of snapping twigs and faint whispers that echoed inside my skull. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted. Shadows clung to corners, Walls seemed to pulse, and objects moved slightly when unobserved. The whispers repeated a chilling phrase. "You belong to the forest now." I realized with mounting horror that the cabin was not a refuge. It was bait. A trap designed to lure intruders into becoming part of the forest's ritual. Every step, every glance, every breath was being observed, memorized, and rehearsed. That night, I decided to confront whatever haunted the forest. Stepping outside, I felt the ground beneath my feet pulse subtly, as if the forest were aware of my presence. The whispers became voices, repeating our names, counting in strange rhythms, echoing unnaturally from all directions. Suddenly, the trees shifted. Branches bent and twisted toward me, forming shapes that were almost humanoid, almost alive. The air grew thick, damp, and suffocating. I realized that the forest wasn't just observing, it was rehearsing. Each movement I made was cataloged, every fearful glance stored for some purpose I could not comprehend. From the shadows, I glimpsed the figures again, their faceless heads tilting as if studying me. They moved in choreographed motions, like actors practicing a script, each step precise, deliberate. I understood then that the cabin, the forest, and the dead pines were part of the same entity. A patient, calculating predator. I had walked into its domain, and it had already begun preparing me for its endless performance. By the seventh night, desperation had replaced fear. Every path we had walked earlier now twisted unnaturally, leading us deeper into the dead pines. The cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a beacon, drawing the forest's attention toward us. Shadows moved just beyond the edges of our vision, impossible shapes that elongated and contracted with a rhythm all their own. Inside the cabin, whispers filled every corner. My friends tried to speak, but their words faltered, as if the forest was swallowing our voices before they could escape. I caught glimpses of the faceless figures standing at the edge of the windows, motionless yet exuding awareness, as if the trees themselves had given them life. The forest had become sentient. Every sound, every glance, every heartbeat was being cataloged. I realized with crushing clarity that this place wasn't haunted in the conventional sense. It was alive, patient, and malevolent. The dead pines weren't just watching. They were waiting for us to falter, to become part of the forest itself. That night, the forest escalated its torment. Wind rose unnaturally, rattling the cabin windows and carrying whispers that seemed to come from inside our minds. My friends panicked, running from room to room, but the dead pines bent subtly around the cabin, making escape feel impossible. Every corner I turned, every shadow I glanced at, seemed to pulse with life. I glimpsed movement through the broken windows, the faceless figures emerging from the forest floor itself, their elongated limbs gliding across the ground with unnatural precision. They circled the cabin, observing, cataloging, rehearsing every fearful reaction. The realization hit me. The forest wasn't simply haunting us. It was performing, turning our fear into a script. We were actors unwillingly cast in a ritual choreographed by nature itself. The cabin was no longer shelter, it was a stage. The forest was both director and predator, and the performance had only just begun. By the ninth night, exhaustion had taken over. The forest seemed endless, stretching farther than memory allowed, every tree a sentinel, every shadow alive. Paths we had walked earlier looped impossibly, forcing us to retrace steps we knew we had already taken. The cabin, our supposed refuge, glowed faintly in the distance, as if calling us back into the heart of the forest. From between the twisted dead pines, the faceless figures emerged silently, circling us in deliberate, rehearsed movements. The whispers intensified, repeating our names in rhythmic patterns, counting our heartbeats, mimicking our fear. The forest had become a living, breathing entity, recording our every reaction, shaping the environment around us with unnatural precision. I realized then that we were no longer visitors. We were unwilling participants in a ritual we could never fully understand. Each fearful glance, each panicked step was being cataloged. The dead pines were patient, eternal, and relentless, and they would not release us until we had become part of their endless performance. The 10th night brought total dread. The forest seemed to pulse with life, branches twisting as though they had muscles, shadows shifting independently. The cabin glowed dimly, a lure in the darkness. Every step we took was mirrored by faceless figures, their elongated limbs stretching impossibly, their movements rehearsed and precise. The whispers became voices, echoing in our minds, commanding, mocking, cataloging. Every sound we made, every fearful glance, was recorded in the pulse of the forest. The dead pines themselves seemed to lean closer, their silhouettes forming humanoid shapes that blended seamlessly with the shadows. We tried to flee, but the forest was infinite, twisting and alive. The cabin had been bait, the figures had been teachers, and now we understood. We were no longer intruders. We were part of the ritual, trapped forever in the choreography of the forest, our fear a performance etched into eternity. The dead pines had claimed us, and they would never let us go. My name is Liam Harper, and this happened when I was driving home late one autumn night through a remote part of Saskatchewan. I had taken a shortcut along a forgotten road near Willow Creek Bridge, a place locals avoided after dark. The bridge spanned a narrow creek lined with gnarled trees, their bare branches twisting like skeletal fingers over the water. The air was thick with fog, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. As I approached the bridge, my headlights flickered oddly, casting fleeting shadows that didn't match the trees. I slowed, sensing an unease that was impossible to ignore. A sudden chill rolled through the car, and the radio began to sputter, static filling the cabin. Then I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the bridge, motionless, impossibly still despite the wind. My pulse quickened, but as I blinked, the figure vanished. I knew then that Willow Creek Bridge held a presence, patient, deliberate, and hungry for anyone foolish enough to cross its path at night. I tried to dismiss the figure as a trick of the fog, but as I drove onto the bridge, the car shuddered and slowed inexplicably. The engine sputtered, the temperature gauge spiking, and an icy chill seeped through the cabin. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement along the railing, a shadow gliding against the fog, unnaturally silent, keeping pace with my car even though I was accelerating. I slammed on the brakes, but the car continued forward, the headlights illuminating only fog and the empty bridge. The figure reappeared, closer now, faceless, with long, thin limbs extending unnaturally. Panic set in as I realized this was no ordinary ghost story. The presence on Willow Creek Bridge was aware, intelligent, and patient, studying my every move, and I understood immediately. Leaving the bridge would not be simple, and turning back might not even be an option. By the third night, I couldn't shake the bridge from my mind. Sleep eluded me as I replayed the figure's movements over and over, each detail more disturbing than the last. Something about it wasn't human. It moved too smoothly, too deliberately, and yet it seemed aware of my every fear. That night, I returned to the area with a friend, Hannah, hoping to prove I wasn't imagining things. As we approached Willow Creek Bridge, fog rolled in thicker than before, clinging to the asphalt and twisting around the railing like spectral hands. Our flashlights barely penetrated it. Suddenly, the same figure appeared, standing motionless in the middle of the bridge. Its faceless head tilted as if studying us, analyzing our fear. I called out, my voice trembling. But the figure didn't move. The wind carried faint whispers, unintelligible yet unmistakably directed at us. I realized then that Willow Creek Bridge wasn't just a location, it was a sentient trap, patient and malevolent, feeding on the fear of anyone who dared to cross after dark. Hannah and I stepped onto the bridge cautiously, hearts hammering in unison. Every step echoed unnaturally, reverberating through the fog as if amplified. The figure didn't move, yet the space around it felt alive, shifting subtly, guiding our gaze to the dark water below. A sudden gust of wind slammed the car parked at the bridge entrance, rocking it violently. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, seeming to swirl around our heads, repeating our names. My flashlight flickered and then died, leaving us in near total darkness. We could feel it then. The presence wasn't just standing on the bridge. It was in the fog, in the shadows, in the air itself. Every instinct screamed to flee. But the bridge seemed longer than memory, stretching endlessly beneath our feet. I understood with rising terror that this was no ordinary haunting. Willow Creek Bridge had chosen us, and it would not release us until we had submitted fully to its patience and malice. By the fifth night, we couldn't ignore the bridge any longer. Every instinct screamed at us to leave, but the pull was magnetic, drawing us back into the fog. The air had grown unnaturally cold, damp, and heavy, pressing against our skin like a living weight. The bridge seemed to stretch further than memory allowed, its warped structure elongating as if to trap us. Suddenly, the figure emerged from the fog, closer than before. Its faceless head tilted, and long limbs swayed slowly in a rhythm that felt almost ritualistic. We froze, unable to move, as whispers circled our minds, repeating our thoughts, our fears, mocking our attempts to rationalize the situation. Hannah grabbed my arm, trembling, and whispered that we needed to retreat. But the path behind us was gone, swallowed by thickening fog, leaving only the bridge and the figure. Panic set in, and I realized with crushing clarity, Willow Creek Bridge wasn't haunted. It was alive, patient, and deliberate, and it had decided we belonged to it. That night, we attempted to retreat, but the bridge had transformed into a maze. Each step forward or backward led us back to the center, where the figure waited silently, faceless and patient. The whispers intensified, echoing in ways that made our heads pound, forming words that felt like commands rather than speech. Stay. Belong. Fear. From the edges of our vision, shapes twisted and elongated among the fog. Humanoid, but impossibly unnatural. They glided silently along the water's edge, across the warped railing, and even along the asphalt itself. I realized then that we were being rehearsed, tested, cataloged, the bridge and the fog acting as one sentient predator. Every instinct screamed for escape, but the fog seemed to anticipate our moves, pushing us back toward the figure. I understood fully then. The bridge didn't just scare its victims, it trapped them, shaping our fear, turning it into a performance for something beyond comprehension. By the seventh night, exhaustion and terror had fused into a paralyzing dread. The bridge had become a labyrinth of fog, seemingly stretching for miles, and every step we took was mirrored by subtle shifts in the mist. The faceless figure remained at the center, watching silently, patient and eternal. Its long limbs swayed slightly, as if orchestrating our every move. Hannah and I tried to speak, to strategize, but our words faltered under the weight of the whispers. They had grown louder, circling our minds in a rhythm that made our heads spin. We could feel shapes moving around the edges of our vision, humanoid but wrong, elongated, faceless, gliding with impossible precision. I realized that the bridge wasn't just haunted. It was alive, sentient, and its patience was calculated. Each fearful glance, each hesitant step, was part of a performance we hadn't agreed to, a ritual we couldn't escape. The bridge and its guardians weren't just observing us. They were shaping us into something the fog demanded we become. By the 8th night, the atmosphere had thickened, almost viscous, pressing against our lungs with every breath. The whispers had evolved, forming half words and broken phrases. Belong, fear, stay. Each syllable made my skin crawl, resonating in my chest as if the fog itself was speaking directly to my heartbeat. Hannah and I attempted to retrace our steps, but the bridge had transformed again. What had seemed like familiar asphalt was now a warped, endless corridor of fog and shadows. Shapes glided at the periphery of our vision, humanoid but impossibly elongated, swaying with the rhythm of some invisible conductor. The central figure remained motionless but commanding, faceless head tilted, as if assessing our fear and our desperation. I understood fully then. Willow Creek Bridge wasn't just a haunted location. It was a sentient predator, patient and calculating, orchestrating our terror into a choreographed ritual. Our fate was no longer in our hands. It belonged to the bridge and the fog that guided it. By the 9th night, exhaustion and terror had stripped us of rational thought. Every attempt to flee the bridge only looped us back toward the center, where the faceless figure waited, still, patient and calculating. The fog thickened to the point where the bridge seemed to vanish beneath our feet, leaving only shadows, whispers, and the oppressive weight of its unseen presence. Shapes glided along the edges, humanoid but impossibly thin and elongated, following our movements with unnerving precision. The whispers grew louder, weaving together phrases that mimicked our thoughts, preempting our fears, and taunting our attempts to escape. I realized with sickening clarity that the bridge had studied us from the start, learning our reactions. And now it was using that knowledge to guide us into submission. The figure did not move, yet its presence dominated everything. The fog, the shadows, even the sound of our own breaths. Willow Creek Bridge was alive, patient, and eternal. We were no longer visitors. We were participants, trapped in a ritual we could never leave. The 10th night marked the final revelation. The fog had thickened into a near-solid wall, and the bridge felt alive beneath our feet, undulating subtly as if breathing. The faceless figure remained motionless at the center, but its presence was absolute, dominating the air, the shadows, and our very thoughts. From the periphery of my vision, shapes glided in perfect, orchestrated patterns, humanoid but impossibly thin and elongated. Their movements synchronized with the whispers that now commanded us. Belong, stay, fear, become. Every instinct screamed to run. But the bridge anticipated each move, folding space subtly, twisting paths, ensuring we remained within its grasp. Hannah and I realized with final clarity that we were no longer in control. Willow Creek Bridge wasn't a haunted place. It was a sentient predator, shaping fear into a ritual, cataloging terror as an art form. We had become unwilling performers, trapped in its choreography forever, and the fog closed around us, swallowing everything but the bridge and its eternal watchers. My name is Evan McLeod, and this happened when I was 26 years old. living in a small Saskatchewan town so quiet that silence felt like a living thing. I had moved there chasing something simple: a cheap rental, steady work at a grain elevator, and the hope that isolation might quiet my head after a rough breakup. The house I rented sat at the very edge of town, where paved roads gave up and became dirt. It was old, narrow, and leaned slightly forward, as if listening. The landlord, an older man named Carl, handed me the keys without smiling. He warned me only about the winters, never about the house itself. That should have been my first clue. The first night, the house felt alert, not noisy, not broken, just aware. Every room seemed to hold its breath when I entered, like I was interrupting something already in progress. I told myself it was nerves. Small towns mess with you like that. But even then, lying in bed, I had the unmistakable feeling that the house wasn't empty when the lights went out. The first few days passed quietly, almost deceptively normal. I worked long shifts, came home exhausted, and tried to ignore the way the house seemed to change once the sun went down. During the day, it was just wood, dust, and old smells. At night, it felt deeper, longer, like the hallways stretched when the lights were off. It started with the windows. I'd catch reflections that didn't match my movements, shadows lagging behind, shapes lingering after I stepped away. Once, while washing dishes, I saw what looked like a face in the dark glass, pale, still, watching. When I spun around, the room was empty. Sleep became difficult. I'd wake at odd hours with a sense that someone was standing just beyond the bedroom door, not breathing, not moving, just waiting. I never heard footsteps, never heard doors open. The silence was worse than noise. I called Carl once to ask about the house's history. He paused too long before answering, then said, "It's always been observant." He hung up before I could ask what that meant. By the end of the first week, the house had started teaching me its rules. Lights could stay on, but only in the rooms I was using. If I left one burning down the hallway, it would flicker violently until I turned it off. The basement door, which I never opened, began appearing slightly ajar no matter how carefully I shut it. Just enough to show darkness beyond the steps. The smell came next. A damp, earthy odor that drifted through the vents late at night, like wet soil and old wood. It reminded me of digging after rain. I scrubbed the floors, checked for mold, even crawled under the house with a flashlight, but found nothing. Still, the smell always returned after midnight. One evening, I heard a knock from inside the walls. Not pipes, not settling wood. 3 deliberate taps, slow and patient, coming from behind the living room wall. I stood frozen, counting my breaths, until the knocking answered back, matching my rhythm. That was the moment I stopped telling myself I was imagining things. The house wasn't reacting to me. It was listening. I finally spoke to someone in town about the house. A woman named Marla, who worked at the local diner, went quiet when I mentioned the address. Her smile faded, replaced by something close to guilt. She told me the house had never stayed occupied for long. People moved in needing quiet, solitude, or escape. They always left quickly, sometimes in the middle of the night. Marla said the house didn't hurt people directly. It learned them first, their routines, their fears, their weakest moments. "It watches," she whispered, refilling my coffee even though my cup was full. "Then it reminds you you're not alone." That night, I returned home with every light on. The relief didn't last. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed framed photos on the wall that weren't mine. Old pictures, grainy faces, people standing in front of the house, strangers who looked tired, hollow. In every photo, someone stood just behind them, blurred, tall, and wrong. And in the newest frame, still warm to the touch, I was already there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, fully dressed, watching the bedroom door like it might open on its own. Every few minutes, the house made subtle adjustments. Soft creaks, distant settling sounds, the faint sigh of air moving through vents. It felt like breathing, slow, controlled, patient. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the hallway light shut off by itself. I hadn't touched the switch. Then came footsteps, not heavy, not rushed, barely there, like someone carefully placing their weight down to avoid being heard. They stopped right outside my door. A shadow slid beneath the gap, stretching longer than it should have. I held my breath, terrified that any sound might invite it in. The doorknob didn't turn. Instead, something pressed against the wood from the other side, enough to make it bow inward slightly. Then, in my own voice, perfectly mimicked, it whispered my name. That was when I understood the truth. The house wasn't haunted by something from the past. It was building something new, and it was using me as the blueprint. Morning didn't bring relief. The house felt heavier, like it had settled deeper into itself overnight. I found muddy footprints leading from the basement stairs to the hallway, then stopping right outside my bedroom door. They were barefoot, long, almost human. I opened the basement door for the first time. The air rushing up was cold enough to sting my lungs. The stairs descended farther than they should have, disappearing into a darkness that swallowed my flashlight beam whole. On the walls, carved deep into the wood, were names. Dozens of them, some scratched, some neatly etched, all real people judging by the photos upstairs. At the bottom step, something shifted, not stepping forward, not retreating, just acknowledging me. I realized then why no one warned me properly. You don't tell people about places like this because once they're aware, the house knows it too. As I backed away, the basement door slammed shut on its own. Behind it, something laughed, quietly, like it was proud of how well I'd learned my place. I tried to leave that afternoon. I packed a single bag, grabbed my keys, and didn't look at the walls as I passed them. The photos were gone anyway. Blank frames stared back at me, as if they were waiting to be filled again. The front door wouldn't open. Not locked, stuck. I pulled until my arms shook, until the wood groaned in protest. Outside, I could see the road, the prairie stretching endlessly beyond it, freedom sitting just a few steps away. Then the windows darkened all at once, as if something massive passed in front of them. The house began to replay me. From the walls came fragments of my life, arguments with my ex, voicemails I never answered, thoughts I'd only ever had in silence. Every regret echoed back, perfectly remembered. That's when I understood the house's hunger. It didn't want bodies. It wanted identity. It wanted to wear people from the inside out, learning them until nothing original was left. The floor beneath me shifted, gently guiding me away from the door and back toward the hallway. The house didn't force me. It didn't need to. It already knew where I'd go. That night, the house finished copying me. Mirrors showed reflections that moved half a second too late. My voice echoed back before I spoke. Even my thoughts felt crowded, like something was reading over my shoulder. I found Carl's name carved in the basement wall. Fresh, deeper than the others. That's when it clicked. He wasn't the landlord anymore. He was a caretaker, someone who stayed just long enough to feed the house and bring it someone new. The thing inside finally revealed itself. Not as a shape, but as a presence that pressed into me from every direction. The walls leaned closer, the The ceiling lowered. I felt myself thinning, memories peeling away one by one. Then it stopped. The house didn't take everything. It let me go. When I woke up outside at dawn, lying in the dirt by the road, the house stood silent behind me. Empty, innocent. People ask why I never reported it. I can't. Because sometimes, late at night, I still hear my footsteps inside that house, moving around without me. I left town the same morning. I didn't pack properly or say goodbye to anyone. I just drove until the prairie blurred into something meaningless behind me. For weeks, I convinced myself it was over, that the house had taken what it wanted and released the rest. But freedom came with a cost I didn't understand yet. Strange things followed me. Reflections lagged again, this time in motel mirrors hundreds of miles away. My handwriting changed without warning. Sometimes I'd wake up having dreamed of rooms I'd never been in, only to realize they matched the layout of the house perfectly. The worst part was the feeling of being incomplete, like someone had copied me and forgotten to paste everything back. Memories felt borrowed, emotions dulled. When people asked me personal questions, I hesitated, unsure which answers were truly mine. I started receiving mail with no return address. Inside were photographs, not of the house, but of me, living my life from angles no one should see, sitting, sleeping, watching the door. The house hadn't lost interest. It had learned how to travel. I'm telling this story because I've started to disappear. Not physically, yet, but in smaller ways. Friends forget conversations we definitely had. Digital photos corrupt themselves when I appear in them. Even my voice recordings sometimes play back wrong, as if someone else is trying to speak through me. Last week, I drove past a familiar dirt road without meaning to. The house was there again. Fresh paint, new mailbox, a for rent sign gently swaying in the wind. In the upstairs window, I saw a man watching the road. He looked exactly like me. Older, maybe, calmer, complete. That's when I realized the truth. I wasn't the survivor, I was the draft. The house keeps the finished version and releases the imperfect copy back into the world, just long enough to return. So, if you ever rent a quiet house on the edge of a small town and it feels like it's paying attention, leave. Because some places don't haunt you. They replace you.